Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics relating to intentional whole child development and supporting the critical work of parents and teachers of young children. Today, I'm talking with Deborah Schein, PhD, author of the book Inspiring Wonder, Awe, and Empathy, Spiritual Development in Young Children. Deb's book came to me shortly after I wrote the post, Is Child Development Spiritually Empty?, which explores some of my own shifting understandings about how spiritual development fits into a whole child development construct. One of the things I really worked on in that post was defining spiritual development in a way that was not exclusively linked to religion. Now, that isn't to say that it's not found in religion, but I really felt that if spirituality is a part of whole child development, then the construct built around that development needed to apply to all children. It needed to be defined in a way that would apply equally to a child being raised in a Christian context, or a Muslim context, or a Jewish context, or a non-religious context. And that perspective is something that I worked really hard at implementing also in my developmental observation tool, which you can get by signing up for the Not Just Cute newsletter. In addition to the more commonly addressed areas of development, there's this section on spiritual development and some of the milestones and experiences that are found in that context. So in the process of all of this, of my own effort to find how spiritual development can be talked about in an academic construct, I received Deb's book and found confirmation for some of those things that I had found in that research as well. This understanding that spiritual development takes us beyond ourselves and into something bigger. Wonder, awe, and a deeper sense of meaning in life and in relationships, and that's something that our young children need. You can find show notes for this episode at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 22. You'll also find a link to Deborah's book, along with my post that I mentioned earlier, and an image that she references in her definition of spiritual development. So having your eyes on that might make it a little bit easier to understand. Also, if you're a teacher in a secular setting working with children from birth to age 8, you'll find a link in the show notes for a questionnaire that Deb is using for ongoing research. If you could take just a moment to check that out and share your own insights and experiences, I know Deb would appreciate that immensely. And now let's dive into this conversation with Deborah Schein, author of Inspiring Wonder, Awe, and Empathy, Spiritual Development in Young Children. Hi, Deb. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm very excited to be here.
This is a topic that's really caught my interest recently, and I know that it's a big interest for you, obviously, and so I'm excited to get your expert input here. So I thought we'd start out at the very beginning. For a lot of people, it's understanding and defining what spiritual development really is, and for you to write an entire book on it from an academic perspective, which I find is pretty unique. I'm just curious, what brought you to this point and what kind of formed this perspective for you?
So it's a great question. And in order for me to answer it, I have to give a little background for myself. So my career as an early childhood educator began as a Montessori teacher. And then I proceeded to have 3 children. And I worked a little bit in Montessori when they were young, but my husband is also a rabbi. And because of that, we had access to an amazing early childhood educator when we lived in California named Claire Cherry. And so we took our child, our oldest, out of the Montessori school and put him in Jewish day school. And that's where I became entrenched until all my children graduated from high school. I stayed within Jewish early childhood education. And when you're in a parochial setting in America, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, it doesn't matter where you are. You have access to blessings and moments of gratitude. You know, it's intertwined within your curriculum, and it's a comfort. So when my children were all out of school, I entered the inner city in Cleveland, and I took a position in a neighborhood centers association. And at the same time, I was also writing a book called What's Jewish About Butterflies, which was a book to help Jewish early childhood educators think more deeply about human values as they teach their classes. So I'm in this school, low economic, mostly children of color, drugs being sold outside the window, writing this Jewish book about blessings, and I'm looking at the kids. Oh, and I forgot to also say that I've spent at least 20 plus years studying the Reggio Emilia philosophy, the 100 languages of children and all of that. So I brought into my classroom the focusing that I got from Montessori. I brought in the 100 languages and theme-based projects and just beautiful art and language for the children to use, and still something's missing. So about March or April of that first year at the Neighborhood Centers Association as an early childhood educator and director, a little child came to me, about 3-year-old, dark-skinned child with a worm in his hand, and I froze. I didn't have a language to bless this moment because all I could think of was Hebrew. And the book I was writing said, you can make up a blessing of your heart. You could say anything, but I froze, which was a really good thing in a way, because I went to the computer and I typed in all the different combinations of spirituality, spiritual development, young children, and nothing came out. Everything that I could find jumped right to God and religion or to 8-year-olds. And I was curious how spiritual development is nurtured from birth. What is it? What does it look like? So I went to my husband, and he said to me, well, you have got to go back to school. So at age 56, I found an online graduate program for a doctoral program that would guide me to just sort of support me in my research. And it was a great match. I won't even go into the program, but it was wonderful. And it was just what I needed. And it allowed me to pick the theorists I wanted to look at. It honed my writing skills, and it gave me a platform for research. So in this graduate program, in this doctoral program, I took the advantage and researched looking for a definition of spiritual development for young children. And I keep putting the word development in there because most people look at spirituality without the development piece. But when you look at an infant that's just being born, I can't look at an infant without thinking development in all different ways. So in order to do the research, I interviewed early childhood educators from across the country. I did a qualitative social constructivist grounded theory study, which permitted my voice to be in the research, given that I was an expert in the field. So I created the questions. I interviewed people on the telephone one-on-one, and then I did a data sorting, which gave me the following definition. And it's really nothing new. It's everything we already know, but the diagram or the picture that came to me is what's unique and new, I think. So if you picture in the first circle, the child is born into a world, and the first thing that hopefully will greet the child is love. According to Montessori, every child is born with a spiritual embryo, and that spiritual embryo is awakened by love. And what is the spiritual embryo? This is incredible. It is the force or the power within the child that pushes them forward to learn. Everything that becomes of that child begins with that love trigger. So, that baby stare that everybody knows, the baby stare, where the baby can be staring at the person who is loving them back, and you can walk between them and the stare doesn't break. The baby has such a hold on the eyes that are loving them. So I think what happens, this is my little take on it, is that the baby feels those loving eyes and realizes that somebody outside of them is looking at them, that there is indeed a self. There's a self here that is being loved. And when that love is felt internally and that spiritual embryo is awakened, the baby can then start looking out and move forward into the world. So that's the first circle. And it also includes deep relationships and I-thou moments. Like a baby can have an I-thou moment with a spoon, a rattle, when they're mouthing and teething and looking and shaking and turning it, that kind of thing. And so anything that a baby can have a relationship with feeds their inner self and that beginning sense of spiritual development. So that's first circle. Second circle is every child also is born with a disposition, certain characteristics that make them who they are, and it's deeper than personality. Well, maybe it's similar to personality, but it's different than character. Character changes throughout a lifetime, but that inner self sort of stays the same. There's something very exact about every human being. And being a mother of 3 grown children and now 3 grandchildren, I think it's amazing. Like, you can look at a baby and you can really sort of see who they're going to become if you have this sensibility. Mm-hmm. So anyway, back to dispositions. The parent and the teacher need to look at the child's disposition and then create environments for the child to live, to feel moments of wonder and awe and joy and inner peace, so that that inner self, that inner sense of self, is nurtured through wonder and all of those amazing, beautiful places. And reverence comes into play too, because along with all of this, you have to have a sense of responsibility. So, when you walk into a classroom and it's a mess and the teachers are cleaning out, that's not a spiritual classroom. Spiritual classroom is one where the children have a sense of responsibility to that environment, to one another. It's a whole thing. It's a whole gestalt. And then once those 2 circles are in place, that sense of self and deep relationships and the wonderment nurturing the child's disposition, then it's amazing. Children are empathetic. They're kind. They're caring. It's not something that's necessarily taught. It sort of emerges from within them. And before 1 year old, I think that this system, it's a system now, 3 circles that I just described, can interchange with each other. So if a child acts kindly, they will also be more open to moments of wonderment, and they will also be strengthening their sense of self, and so on. Any one of those circles can affect all the others. So that's the definition that emerged, and that's how I got to it. And one other thing I just want to say is, I feel like a vessel, like this energy of finding and thinking about spirituality is coming through me. It's weird. I can't describe it any other way. It's just like that force is coming through me to talk about, because it's so needed.
Yeah. And it's clear that you're so passionate about it. So when you put these pieces together, I know one of the questions that I will often hear when I talk to people about spiritual development, and I think it's a really valid question, so I'm curious to get your perspective on it. How do these pieces, how do they differ from like social emotional development? There are some people, and I know you mentioned in your book, people that said, couldn't you just approach social emotional development? It'll be so much safer. People won't be so closed. So how are they different, and why do we need all of them rather than just one or the other?
Yes, I have been asked that many, many times, including by my sister over and over again, but she stopped asking me now because I think I've got a good answer. So social development, the way I see it, is it's about people to people, how people are with each other. And certainly spirituality is part of that, especially when you come to the kindness piece and to the empathetic piece. So that's social development. Emotional development is how you feel. So when you're out in nature, nature's a big part of nurturing a child spiritually human. You know what? I'm not even going to say child anymore. I think everything I'm talking about is for all humans, because I'm realizing that the parent needs to be nurtured spiritually just as much as the child in order to give the child the nurturing they need. And I have another book in there. I do have another book that I wrote on, it's sort of like a workbook for adults to nurture their own spirit, but I'm thinking that's even bigger than that. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So emotions is how you feel, but spirituality is deeper. It's to the core of your person. And when I do workshops, I will bring a basket of nature things, and I'll ask people to choose something that calls to them. And I'll have them draw a picture of it and then draw it from another angle and then maybe give it a name, and then share not what they did, but how it felt to be in relationship with that object. And I get such amazing answers, almost universal answers. I've even done this with 3-year-olds, and I get things like, I felt calm, I felt integrated, I felt connected. But these are not the emotions of happy, sad. They're different kinds of emotions. They're deeper kinds of emotions that connect us humanly to one another on a different explain than emotional development. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, and that's kind of the angle that I went with it, that it goes beyond. It seems like it's more than, like you said, that some of those simple definitions, it's almost like it levels up beyond that. And in that same context, those same conversations that I've had, often it's because people have felt uncomfortable. In fact, I did a training a few months ago, and each group had to come take a different area of development. They were in these folders, and they were doing some small group work with it. And one of them said spiritual development on the folder. And I watched about 10 groups come up and look at it and walk past it and go get another one. And then finally the last group came up and saw it, and I saw the looks on their faces. Just like, what do we do with this? Because they were public school teachers. And it was interesting to see their reaction afterwards. They came to some of those same realizations that you're talking about, that this connectedness that goes beyond some of the lower levels that we often talk about, that it's something more, something that transcends and goes beyond. And these same people who didn't want that folder were all the ones nodding their heads afterwards saying, yes, 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 we've seen that, and we need that, and we want that.
Oh, that's so great.
So one of the things I think that makes people so hesitant, and you kind of mentioned it as well, is that so often people connect spirituality with a religion. And like you mentioned, when you tried to find information, so much of what you got back was based in a religion. So, and I've done a little bit of writing on my site that I'll share on here as well, that trying to point out that how spirituality is within religions, but that's not the only place that you can find it. So how do you explain to people, is it possible to emphasize and focus on spirituality without espousing a specific religion? As we've mentioned, with a public school experience, can you have spirituality?
Yes, you absolutely can. I mean, if you go back to my definition of spirituality, I didn't mention God and religion in that definition at all. But I did forget one important thing that happens while children are learning. They begin to ask questions. And the bigger the question and the deeper the question, whatever it might be, takes them to a place where they begin to realize that they're part of something bigger. And especially when you take children out in nature, that's a really good place where the God part starts to come in, because the transcendence piece of understanding your relationship to the world, it's like you start thinking there might be something bigger than what we're seeing here. Mm-hmm. That's where God could come in. But that doesn't happen till a child can actually formulate these big questions so that they can feel part of something bigger. Mm-hmm. I talk in my book about self-awareness and ego. No, I don't use that term though. Self-esteem. So my children they're in their 30s and 40s now. During the time that they were being raised, it was really a time of focus on self-esteem, and mm-hmm. parents really filled their kids up till they popped, right. Too much self-esteem is not good. Self-awareness is a whole different thing. So if you have a sense of self-awareness and you develop these wonderful relationships with everything around you, that's a spiritualness without God and religion. So and it goes into equality. It goes into respect for others. It goes into deeper understanding of self in comparison to others. It's a really beautiful way to think about the world in general, mm-hmm. Before you get into that transcendent place. So God and religion, spirituality, fits into this corner place of transcendence. Most people will define spirituality as transcendence. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying for the infant, at least, maybe for anyone, there's an earlier foundation of relationships, wonder, and empathy.
I love those. I love that emphasis, relationships, wonder, and empathy. And that, as you mentioned, that going beyond yourself to something bigger than yourself, as you mentioned, that's something that we can emphasize and talk about and expose children to in any context. And as you mentioned, it's something that's really needed. What do you think are some of the costs to not only our educational experiences, but our society I almost feel like there's this aversion to approaching spirituality because we are so confused about this entanglement and thinking we can't talk about it. We can't emphasize it because it's religion. So when we strip away all of that and maybe take out too much and we don't pay enough attention to this spirituality, what do you feel like is at risk?
Well, two gigantic things. First of all, you get a world of narcissists, which we have today. Mm-hmm. We have a world being led by narcissistic people. Money hungry, unkind, not supportive of equality. I'm not going to get political here, but narcissism is the most largest consequence of not nurturing one's spiritual development, because all you have is a self. Then you have no connection. So that's one thing. But another important thing too, and this is still projection, like I haven't done any testing on it, but after I looked at all of the data I accumulated, it seemed to me that all of development, all of the other areas of development actually are built upon one's spiritual development. I see it sort of as the building block for everything. So, if you have these relationships and if you have moments in wonder and you are practicing and feeling and supporting empathy, then you are more open to be a learner. Your windows are open. So all other areas, all other domains of development are made stronger.
Well, especially that emphasis on wonder. I think, like you mentioned, that's where so much learning, so much development comes from, that engine of wonder. And I just love that word because it is, again, it's one of those words that goes beyond just that base level. But wonder is really a passion-driven pursuit. And to create environments for our children that have that wonder, how powerful that
yeah,
is.
And I also use the word awe, which is wonder with a little touch of fear, because life shouldn't just be smooth. Somebody just told me, this is so amazing, that there was a biodome where plants and trees were planted and everything flourished in the biodome except the trees. And the reason the trees didn't grow well is because there was no wind. Mm-hmm. And without wind, their roots didn't grow strong enough to hold them. And so we need, like, that Montessori spiritual embryo is a force. And my biology friend said that a force needs something to push against. So we need our children spirituality is not about smooth, happy all the time. It's about learning to struggle within what's the word from Reggio that I love? Provocation. Mm. So the provocation is, it could be a problem, but if you look at it as a tool to move you forward, it pushes you it triggers you to grow, to change, to move on. It's not a problem. It's a good thing.
I love that perspective. I think that's so critical.
It is.
So what do you think are some of the factors in our culture that are hampering our spiritual development? As you said, not just for our children, but for all of us as humans, because I'm with you. I emphasize early childhood development. That's my specialty, but really it's about human development. So it pertains to all of us. So what are some of the factors culturally or otherwise that seem to be pushing against that development?
I think, the one thing that comes to mind immediately, because I read it in the newspaper today, is things are so expensive. So because of that, like, it costs like $325,000 to build a new house now. How many people can afford those kind of houses? Like, not that many. So both set of parents have to work in order to get money to live in the house, to have the cell phones and the televisions cost money. Everything costs money now. It's like, I just think we should all go out to nature and, live more simply.
But it does make sense that all of those pressures create, in a sense, a distraction.
Right. And another thing that comes to mind, which is you're gonna love, and it's very huge, is that children are not given enough time to play. Mm. And that really brings me to my second question that I asked in my dissertation. I asked, after I got the people's feelings about spirituality, I then asked them, so what do you do in your classrooms? What kind of activities and experiences do you provide for young children so that they can feel what you've just described to me? And they all stopped and said to me, what? Nobody ever asked us that. We don't know. And I said, well, when the child's face is glowing, what have you given them in the classroom? What kind of classroom environment? And they said, oh, and then they started talking like nonstop. And I tried to write it up 3 times. And I would be waking up in the middle of the night trying to think what people were saying to me. And finally, I realized they weren't talking about activities and experiences, which is the way we usually look at a classroom interchange or what happens in a classroom. They were talking about moments, and they said things like, it could pass you in a blink. It's like a burst, or it could last for days and weeks. So you have to be looking for. You have to know what you're looking for. And so in their language, I found that they talked about spiritual moments in time, spiritual moments in space or place, spiritual moments in nature, spiritual moments in relationship, and spiritual moments in big questions. And in their language, they gave me specific guidelines on how to create those spiritual moments for children. And I think all people need these spiritual moments. I have to write about this. This is going to be my next thing to write about, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a lot of things on my mind.
So what are some of those principles, and what are some of the ways that we as parents and as teachers can, in simple ways, put more intentionality towards emphasizing spiritual development and creating those moments, like you said, that may be big moments, but sometimes they're those quick flashes. So how do we prepare for them? How do we open up those opportunities, and how do we, maximize that potential?
Well, let's just look at spirituality and time, because that's a great place to talk about play, which is another thing totally missing in our culture right now. But we do know that play is really, really valuable for kids, and they're being robbed of it, and they're never given any time to be alone, and they are not given responsibility to grow and just space to breathe. So I have this one picture that I've used over and over again. It's getting a little old, but it still captures it for me, spiritual moment in time. It's a picture of a little girl building with these huge blocks by herself in a classroom. And she looks like she's contemplating, where am I going to put this next block? And they're big, and they're on this platform, and she has space, which is spiritual moment in space, and spiritual moments in time, in that nothing's rushing her. 2 little boys are looking out a window while somebody's outside mowing a lawn. You can almost smell the green grass, and they're just looking. Now, one teacher looked at that picture and said, oh, those kids just want to go outside. And if you look at their body posture, they are so content to just be there in that window, looking out, smelling the green grass. The window is open. It's springtime. And it's just, the classroom is beautiful. There's sun coming in, and it's organized. All of these things are really important to have spiritual moment in time and space. Not cluttered. Too many toys really blur a kid's vision. All the things that we know as good educators are the same things that apply to a spiritual moment in time and space.
And it's interesting to think, when you say not cluttered, I think it's easy to picture of that in the space context. But as you put time and space together, that really brought to mind to me how I sometimes clutter our time and what a factor that can be as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Open-ended. My husband and I took our 2 younger grandchildren, who are now 5 and 8, out into the snow on Sunday. It was warm, and we built snowmen, and then we were going to take them out for hot chocolate. They did not want to go for hot chocolate. They wanted to stay outside and play some more. And they did. Yeah.
That is wonderful.
And they play. Some people say kids don't know how to play. Right. If you give them space, they will play.
So they need that time and that space. And then what was the next layer? Or I guess category?
Oh, spiritual moments in time, space, in nature. Nature. I go into classrooms and I look to see how many items have been brought in for nature. So you need to take kids outdoors and give them lots and lots of time outdoors. But you also can bring nature indoors and let them explore up close, something of their choice. So that's another piece. And then spiritual moments in relationships, which comes right out of the definition, and spiritual moments with big questions, which takes you to the transcendence place.
And I think that relationships piece is a powerful one as well. That's another one that's really caught my attention, how much of human development, and as you said before, if you look at your definition of spiritual development, how that is at the core of so much of the other aspects of development. And I've kind of been stumbling on that over and over with relationships specifically. So much of development comes back to our relationships. So I think that's a really important aspect that you emphasize. So what are some of the things that we can do to encourage these healthy relationships and to build relationships with children? What are some ways that we, again, as parents and as educators, can emphasize that relationship piece? Because I think especially as you mentioned some of these challenging factors that we have that emphasize on data and emphasize some of these other things, how do we bring it back to relationships? Because when we exclude that, it's really to our detriment. The first two things that come to mind are modeling. And let me tell you, that is like huge, because parents are not often careful with what they say in earshot of their children. And so they talk about other parents, they talk about teachers, they talk about principals, they talk about presidents, they talk about, their spouses, they talk about their brothers and sisters and their mothers and fathers who are the kids' aunts and uncles and grandparents. It's like, if you want kind human beings on the earth, you must be kind yourself. And that starts with how you speak about other people. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't talk about the child's absorbent mind. This is another metaphor from Montessori. Mm-hmm. Children are born, and brain research has confirmed so many things that Montessori talked about. Children are born with brains that are dense in dendrites. The dendrites make your short-term memory and your immediate things very accessible. So I always say, don't play the game concentration, the matching game with a 4-year-old, because they will win 100% all the time because of those dendrites. And so I have like this little goose. I have it right here next to my turtle here, a live turtle, a fake goose. Like the little goose I would put in my classroom, little plastic goose, and I put him near the doorway and at the beginning, first day of school, and the kids would all come in and they'd see this little goose. And the classroom was always pristine, like very important to have a place for everything and show children where to put things when they're finished and have them choose their activities from the shelf. These are all from my Montessori background, and I carried that with me wherever I went, because it gives the child a sense of responsibility, a sense of security, that they know where things will be. They can predict where to find their materials that they want, so that they can carry out their ideas. That's the whole idea of learning, is to have an idea and being able to carry it out and share it, have a dialogue with other people, and then move from there to another idea. It's like a stream of emergent experiences that lead to something really big and important. And so if kids can't make those predictions, if kids can't find their stuff, then they're just going to hang out, and get into trouble. And when you share your ideas with somebody who's on, like you and I right now, sharing something that we're both passionate about, it makes it richer. It's joyful. It creates a joyful experience for the people who are engaged. So friendships start when you share your ideas. They're not forced. You can't force people to be friends with each other. You can't force a child to say you're sorry to somebody. You could say the words, but the feelings have to be genuine. So you have to model all of this for children in a very conscious way, because they have absorbent minds, and they will drink in every little nuance that they can see. They will notice if that little goose that I put at the beginning of the school year is moved. Their 1-year-old child, their 1-year-old sibling will notice, but none of the parents will notice. Right. It's like, they'll say, "Where's the goose, Deb? Where's the goose?" I'm like, "Look around, you'll find it." And they find it instantly, and the parents go, "What goose? What goose are we talking about?" Right?
Yeah. It's every year, I swear it is like crazy.
So it's creating that environment, the modeling as well, but creating that environment where they're safe to have those relationships and to do that practice and to feel safe enough to apologize and to see the modeling and to practice it themselves. Well, everything that you've offered today, and as we said, there's so much more in the book and there's so much more to be found there, but are there any other quick takeaways that you're just burning to share, any simple things that you feel like parents and educators need to know or can put into practice today that will help them to nurture spirituality and wonder and awe and empathy for their children?
I think one of the most important things, and I touched upon it, was seeing your child's disposition. So you really have to observe. You have to really play close attention to your child's desires. And I'm not saying spoil them. I'm not saying give them everything they want. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about meeting them at important places where they are and helping them learn to fill their own needs so that they can be strong human beings in control of their own destiny, in a way, I think is what I'm saying. They won't get there without the help of a parent who is looking at them with loving eyes and seeing, I see you're hungry. Let's go get some food. What would you like to eat today? These are your choices. And when the child has a meltdown, when the choice that they want isn't there, then you can say to the child, I understand, but this is what we have. And then you can also say to the child, when the child's calmed down, when you have those fits, when you lose control like that, you are actually in control. You don't have to go cry like that. You don't have to do that. I can feel and support your sadness or your disappointment, but you're choosing to let yourself do that. And when a child gets so out of control where they lose control, they sometimes just need a big hug. So it's like, how do we know when the child has, I don't know if this is even making any sense, but in my head it does. So there's two things happening. The child loses control because they've really lost control, or the child is choosing to lose control because they know they'll get their way. They're manipulating the situation. They don't know any of this consciously. It only is a trigger inside of them. So if we help them to distinguish, you're in control of what you choose to do, and we're in control if the child's totally lost control and needs that extra hug. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
I think it does. And I think as you talk about the importance of seeing children with loving eyes and recognizing what they need and then acting empathetically but in a way that empowers them is a really powerful perspective that, again, as we've mentioned before, really travels that lifespan. I mean, you come from a perspective with adult children. I have my oldest are now, entering their teen years, and I see some of those as you're talking about these things. I'm realizing, I was pretty good at that with my preschoolers, with my toddlers. Am I doing the same thing for my teenagers? Do I see what they need, not what I want them to be or do, but do I see what they need, and do I respond in a way that is empathetic but also empowering? I think that's a really, it's simple when you break it down. Simple doesn't always mean easy to do, but
it's not easy at all.
Well, I love you've given us so much to think about, and I'm sure I'll be asking you some more later, but this is really fascinating. And as I mentioned before, I really appreciate the work that you've put into taking a concept that is really important and presenting it in a way so that it's accessible for everyone, that we can make it into I don't know, for lack of a better word, we can put it into an academic construct so that we can talk about it and implement it in a way that is accessible for everyone. And so I really appreciate the work that you put into that.
Well, Amanda, I'm so excited to be doing this podcast, my very first one. And look, I finished my doctorate at age, 63, I think. And I feel like I don't have enough time to do all that I want to do. So every little piece is very helpful. Oh, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing your passion.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 22. You'll find a link to the book we discussed today, along with other interesting resources. While you're there, be sure to sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter and receive the Whole Child Development Guide, which includes a section on spiritual development as well. Also, if you teach in a secular school setting, working with children from birth to age 8, Deb would love your input on her current research, so be sure to check out that in the show notes. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. And follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/notjustcute. Thanks for listening today, and thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.